The SAT was first deployed to diversify the Ivy League beyond rich prep schoolers. The interesting word there is diversify, especially for a test that at its beginnings was bound to eugenics.
The eugenics movement was, by our standards, certainly racist.
In the early 1900s, eugenics was a movement led by social scientists that believed you could improve the human race through selective breeding. And Princeton professor Carl Brigham was one of those scientists, according to Nicholas Lehman, author of The Big Test.
The eugenics movement was tied to the IQ testing movement.
A movement, according to Lehman, that was adopted by eugenicists like Brigham and used as a measure of gauging inborn intelligence. They developed tests for the Army during World War I. The tests were supposed to measure the intelligence of recruits to identify men with so-called superior mental ability and those deemed, quote, mentally inferior.
After the war, he published a book called A Study of American Intelligence.
A book that raised his profile as a eugenicist and sounded the alarm about Europeans streaming in from Eastern and Southern Europe.
The findings said you can order the races by their native intelligence. And, I've become alarmed because all these races of low intelligence are streaming into our country, and they're going to overwhelm the races of higher intelligence.
And by races of higher intelligence, Brigham was speaking of white, native-born Protestant men. According to all evidence available, then, American intelligence is declining. He further argued, the decline of American intelligence will be more rapid than the decline of the intelligence of other European groups owing to the presence of the Negro. Eugenicists promoted laws and movements for the preservation of racial purity, and states began to pass laws upheld by the Supreme Court, even allowing the sterilization of people with so-called defective traits to prevent them from, quote, polluting America's ruling class. Brigham's next project?
In the years after he wrote that book, Brigham developed the SAT.
Yes, that SAT. The test was first given in 1926 to 8,000 high schoolers with an eye towards Ivy League schools that wanted to diversify their wealthy prep school student body with other native-born whites.
The same assumptions that were built into the SAT when it was founded by eugenicists, people who believed that black people and women and Jews were inferior to white Aryans, were built into the test, and those same fundamental assumptions are included in the test today.
Bob Schaefer is the head of Fair Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. And he says even today, the way the SAT and other standardized tests are used creates further barriers and preferences the more affluent, whose children tend to be born healthy into environments not filled with chemicals and environmental toxins.
The tests are supposed to predict how well you can do, not where you've come from.
When they came up with that test, they only used white people to standardize what this intelligence was.
Wei-Ling Malone is a doctoral student and researcher at NYU. She spent years teaching. She believes teachers have to spend too much time getting students ready for these tests. It's also a question of their outside surroundings.
They may not have a lot of green space, or they may have a bunch of trauma from other things that are happening. And then a teacher is told to come and teach to the test, and what they're learning about is not relevant to their lives at all.
And still, the SAT and other standardized testing endures, despite its racist roots. But its days may have an expiration date. Just this spring, the University of California Board of Regents unanimously approved the suspension of the standardized testing requirement for all California freshman applicants until fall of 2024, and to create a new test that better demonstrates their preparedness for college. And on its website, Fair Test has a list of more than 1,500 four-year colleges and universities listed as test optional, and believe it or not, it seems Carl Brigham would approve. In the 1930s, he denounced the eugenics movement, becoming its leading critic. He also disowned his own book, calling it worthless, and it didn't end there.
Then, through the 1930s up until his death in the early 1940s, actually campaigned against using the SAT broadly as a college admissions device. So it's an interesting story in that way.
It is an interesting story. We have Craig Treadway here to give us some more.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So is there a cost that is attached to the test, and does it come out of the students' pockets?
Well, it does, Tamsin, and that's where the financial bias comes in. You see, it costs about $50 without the essay to take the test, and it's $65 or thereabouts with the essay, which of course could be an issue for some low-income students. But wealthier families can afford to pay that. They can also afford to pay for test prep, which often results in better scores, which itself is a multi-million-dollar industry and can cost the student and their families into the thousands.
Wow. All right, Craig, thank you so much. Well, many of the Ivy League schools, including Harvard and Princeton, they have temporarily suspended standardized testing for the 2020-2021 year because of COVID. No word if or when they will resume.
Yeah, the College Board, who owns the SAT, says whether required for admission or not, SAT scores help colleges create data-driven programs to ensure admitted students get the supports they need to graduate.